Gothic romance, weirdo sci-fi, and Hindu demons, oh my. My name is Houston, and these are the best comics of 2024. First up is Somna by Becky Cloonan and Tula Lotay. This is a gothic erotica miniseries about this really lonely woman in 1600s England. Her husband is this extremely chaste, law enforcement officer who's getting pulled into the witch trial. So he's essentially like a witch finder. And the more isolated and spurned she feels, the more often she has these recurring wet dreams of being visited and seduced by the devil. The setting and tone of this one are so fun. I love the historical, especially like a fantasy historical thing. It's subtitled A Bedtime Story. So it's kind of got that blurry, like Brothers Grimm vibe to it. Formally, this comic's also really interesting. They're co-creators and they split the writing and artistic duties. So the more waking world is done in this more traditional line work, very grounded, and the paneling and all the text boxes and everything are very traditional. And that's done by Cloonan. And then Lutey does all of the dream sequency stuff in this very painterly loose style that has, text boxes that are a little bit all over the place. It's a little bit more floaty. It's painterly. Really enjoyed this one. The next up is Self-Esteem and the End of the World by Luke Healy. This is a slice of life tragic comedy that feels autobio, but eventually gets to a place where you're like, okay, how much of this is pulled from real life? Some of the stuff we see is, stories about dating after coming out in their 30s, their experience directing a corporate murder mystery party during a flood, and getting a comic made into a movie. The lines and panels in this are really cute and efficient, somewhere between Tomine and Ware, probably, I would categorize it. There's a very restrained color palette, which really ties the whole thing together, too. There's some fun formal choices going on. For instance, we do see him visit the set of a movie production that was an old zine of his got licensed off for a movie or something like that. But we see the weird, crazy, high-budget execution of his story. And then later on in the book, you see, in a more crudely drawn style of the rest of the comic, the zine that this was based off of. This is a me thing, but over my life, I've read so many autobio comics that they kind of start at a disadvantage for me because the charm of them has worn off to a point where it's another one. Or it feels lazy. It's not, and that's unfair, but that's just how it feels. Right now, I prefer my autobio to be at least playfully exaggerated magical realism, maybe a Glenn Gange's. And Self-Esteem in the World is definitely playing in that style, maybe not as extreme, but it is definitely playing in that style. Will I contradict myself later in this list? Who's to say? I'm a complex man. All right, so let's get into the number stuff. Also, it's hot in here. I'm going to take this off. Number 4 is Precious Metal, written by Darcy Van Polgeest, with art by Ian Bertram. Okay, how do I describe the plot? The plot in this is wild. Precious Metal is this world-building heavy sci-fi about a bounty hunter whose latest job they just got was to intercept this child with supernatural abilities. This job ends up throwing him into the middle of this widespread religious political conspiracy. The character designs in this are stupid. They are so good. Just super inspiring work. This story is set in far future America, and almost everybody has gotten their body altered by these bioorganic modifications. So they're really slippy, slimy, soft corners. So all the designs are really unexpected and have strange silhouettes. Almost think if Judge Dredd was in the Akira universe. The story is super dense and hard to follow. I even saw when people were reviewing it, they were talking about how they would read it with their friends and then they'd all try to unpick what was going on in the world, not in a like negative way, but in like a fun, like, okay, let's figure out what this world is. Let's figure out what's going on kind of way. But the art and ideas going on are so compelling that it pulls you through the story regardless, to the point where I don't understand 100% what happened in this kind of narrative, but I'm compelled to read it again to have those art and story click together, which is not something I think that often of an experience that I have with comics, that I want to reread it to understand it better. But even on a first read through, there are some parts that really, really click, and it's magic. It's so, so good when those things work together. Also, this is a prequel series, so if you loved this, you could potentially go read Little Bird, which is won an Eisner. And this brings us to number 3, the other autobio comic here in the mix. This is All My Bicycles by Power Paula. Power Paula is Colombian Ecuadorian, and this is a short series of poetic vignettes telling the story of different parts of her life associated with different bicycles that she's owned. I've read one of the other books by this author, and it's much more straightforwardly told. But here we get these like textural snapshots with fantasy elements, poetrying their way into the narrative. For instance, like one of the first stories ends with her getting eaten alive by an alligator, for instance. It's really able to set the tone and the vibe with minimal dialogue. Which is really fun and really puts you in a sense of place. It's immersive. Like I said, it's short, which is nice, especially because of its poetic nature. You can really read it a couple of times or circle back around to parts you liked or linger on something. It gives you permission to. The vibes are really great in this book. And instead of explaining that to you, I'll just give you an example so you can see if it's your cup of tea. So about 10 minutes before this scene happens, Power Paula and her ex are talking, and they decide that they should break up. So here we're seeing them. They're both on their bikes. They're going back to their respective homes, and they reach a fork in the road. They hug their goodbyes to each other and wish each other luck, and they both head in different directions, as underneath the author narrates. In 1890, bicycles became popular in lots of places around the world. Women started wearing pants and gained more independence getting around. After that day, I was alone again. We're getting close. Coming in at number 2, Rare Flavors, written by Ram V, with art by Felipe Andrade. So the basic premise of this is that there's this ancient Hindu demon who, after centuries of hedonism, doing whatever he wanted, he's searching for the next high, and he's wandering the modern world in search of the best bite of food. And the story we see, and where we catch up with him, is he has hired a filmmaker to turn this journey into an Anthony Bourdain-style TV show. This is a very Neil Gaiman style, like, quote, fairy tale characters in a modern setting story with great character designs and really, really beautiful art. Each story centers around a recipe, and the characters and imagery in this are so memorable and iconic. While I was reading, I was definitely like, oh damn, like I can recognize this character. And that doesn't always happen, you know, and it doesn't feel over designed. It just, once you look at one of the characters, there's these two people chasing our main character, for instance, and even they are both very, oh cool, like yeah, I definitely could, I definitely, it just felt like something that already existed in a good way. Ramvi has been a part of several projects that I enjoyed this year, but Rare Flavors was the first one that I came across, and I really, really loved it. I don't have any crazy deep thoughts about this one outside of this is a super fun story, super well told, especially if you were ever into that Neil Gaiman style of storytelling, which I certainly was in college. I feel that this story here is up there with the best of the Sandman arcs. And finally, my favorite comic of this year. Maybe this is uninteresting. I don't know. I think a lot of people liked it. Blurry by Dash Shaw. This is a 400-page Russian doll of interlocking vignettes about choices. Now, that is such a vague description. There's so much going on in this book, like a lot of slice of life books, and saying it's stories about choices, vignettes about choices is probably as vague as you can get. But where this really shines is not just in the individual stories that are told in here, which are great, but in how playfully it's put together. So we start on the outer perimeter, this outside story about a husband and wife. They go to the mall. The wife goes to get some ice cream, and the husband goes to the store to pick out a dress shirt for a wedding. He's deciding between 2 dress shirts in different shades of blue. The attendant, the retail worker, comes up, and turns out they know each other. And as they get to talking, she tells an anecdote. And as she starts her anecdote, we can hop into that story, which is not super related to the other story. And then as we're in there, eventually we meet another person who tells an anecdote, and then we jump into that story, and so on and so forth till we reach the center. And then we start ending all of the stories, and we circle all the way back out till we're back at the spot where the wife's getting ice cream, the husband's buying a shirt. Once we reach the center of that maze and the story starts to trace back to the beginning, the momentum it builds is incredibly fun. It's like, whoa, okay, boom, boom, boom. That last half, like, whoa, it goes by so fast. But each individual story is fun on its own, even when you're getting there, especially once you recognize the pattern. You're like, okay, how deep is this going to go? How are we going to get out of it, etc. The stories themselves are unrelated, but slowly they begin starting to rhyme with each other a little bit, which is just such a fun reading experience, because to me, at least, it taps into kind of a magic of the way all of our stories in real life kind of rhyme with each other. Structurally, the layout is really interesting as well. It's a long book, but each page is only 4 panels. So it really moves the story at a super consistent pace, regardless of how mundane or exciting what's on the pages. And those pages move fast because there's only 4 panels per. One of my favorite artistic experiments in the book, it takes advantage of this consistency of panels. There's some characters who are driving through fog, and on the pages, the panels will just be white. But because all the panels are the same consistently throughout, you will see these faint ink bleeds of what's on the other side. So it almost looks like you're looking through fog and you can barely see something. And then as they're driving, things will feel like they're passing by you. Really, really fun, really magical, and is a book that I feel is best told in its format, in its comic book format. And for those reasons, that's my favorite comic of 2024. There was a lot of stuff that came out this year. I'm sure a lot of things that I snubbed that people love. If you love something and didn't talk about it, leave it in the comments. Preemptive, I'm sorry for Transformers, which I enjoyed. If you liked what you saw here, I'll be back again next week with another countdown of some of my favorite stuff from the year in a different entertainment medium. All right, get back to work. Bye.